This is an embarrassment! Get out! The champagne flute crashed against the marble floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering pieces, much like the life I thought I had. My father's voice boomed through the grand ballroom, drowning out the stunned gasps of the guests. My mother clutched her pearls, her perfectly sculpted face frozen in a mask of horror. My sister, always the obedient one, looked away, pretending not to see me humiliated in front of Cincinnati's elite. "You think you can marry him?" My father spat, his face twisted with rage. "Do you know what you've done, Elizabeth? Do you even understand the consequences?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. Of course I knew. I knew exactly why they were reacting this way. Because Daniel wasn't one of us. Because he was from the rival family. Because in my father's eyes, I had just committed the ultimate betrayal. "I love him," I said, my voice shaking but defiant. "And nothing you do will change that." His eyes burned into mine, a silent war waging between us. But I wasn't backing down. Not this time. The night had started with so much promise. I had spent weeks planning this evening. The grand ballroom at the Riverside Terrace was adorned with cascading white roses and golden chandeliers, the music from the live orchestra echoing off the high ceilings. It was meant to be the perfect night, a celebration of love, of commitment, of defying the odds. Instead, it had become a battlefield. Daniel had planned to propose in front of everyone, to show the world that our love was real, unshakable. But I hadn't expected my father to react so violently, not in public. My mother, still clutching her pearls, finally found her voice. "Elizabeth, you don't understand! You can't do this! Not with him!" Daniel rose to his feet beside me, his jaw clenched. "With all due respect, Mrs. Whitmore, your daughter can make her own choices. Not when those choices destroy this family," my father roared. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? You've aligned yourself with the people who have tried to ruin us for decades. The Chens are not our allies. They are not our equals." My fingers curled into fists at my sides. "That's what this is about? Business? Money? Not my happiness?" "Don't be naive," he snapped. "In this world, happiness comes second to power, and you have just handed ours away." The air in the ballroom was suffocating. Eyes bore into us from all directions, whispers spreading like wildfire. Vanessa, my younger sister, stood frozen near the champagne table, watching the spectacle unfold, her lips pressed into a thin line. I turned to Daniel, my heart aching at the pain I saw in his dark eyes. "Let's go." He didn't hesitate. Taking my hand, he led me through the sea of judgmental stares, past my parents, past the guests who had once called themselves my friends. The weight of my family's disapproval pressed down on me, but I kept walking. As we reached the exit, my father's final words cut through the air like a dagger. "If you leave with him now, Elizabeth, you are no longer my daughter." A chill ran through my spine, but I didn't stop. Daniel squeezed my hand tighter. "We'll figure this out, together." I nodded, swallowing the lump of fear that threatened to choke me. I had just walked away from everything I had ever known, but for the first time in my life I felt free. What I didn't know was that this war was only just beginning. The champagne still dripped from my dress as I walked out of that cursed ballroom. The cold night air bit into my skin, but it was nothing compared to the chill in my chest. My mother's voice echoed in my mind, sharp and cutting like glass. "You have embarrassed this family enough." My father hadn't even looked at me. He had simply turned his back as if I had ceased to exist. And David had stood there, silent, as my world came crashing down around me. The night that was supposed to be the beginning of our forever had turned into a public execution. My engagement, my love, had been stripped away in front of hundreds of people who whispered behind their champagne flutes, reveling in the scandal of it all. And the worst part? I had no one. No family, no home, nowhere to go. I barely noticed the rain beginning to fall as I walked blindly down the empty street. My mind raced, replaying every humiliating moment. The way my father sneered at David, the way my mother whispered something to my sister before turning her icy gaze on me. They had planned this. They had orchestrated my downfall like it was a business deal, sealing my fate with the stroke of a pen. A car pulled up beside me, the tires splashing water onto the sidewalk. I turned sharply, my heart pounding. For a moment, I thought it was David, chasing after me, telling me this was all some nightmare. But it wasn't. It was Vanessa. "Jenna, get in," she said, her voice unusually soft. I hesitated. Vanessa had always been my parents' perfect little soldier, their golden child. If she was here, that meant she had something to say, something I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. She sighed, pushing open the passenger door. "Just get in. You're soaked." Against my better judgment, I slid inside. The heat blasted my frozen hands, and for a moment I allowed myself to feel the warmth. "I didn't know they were going to do that." Vanessa started, keeping her eyes on the road. I swear, Jenna, I thought they were just going to... She stopped, biting her lip. Just going to what? Shame me privately? Give me a speech about how I was ruining the family name? My voice shook with rage. Instead, they humiliated me in front of everyone. They destroyed David. Vanessa swallowed hard. It wasn't supposed to be like that. Then what was it supposed to be? I demanded. A quiet annulment? A graceful breakup orchestrated by our dear parents? She didn't answer right away, and that told me everything I needed to know. My hands clenched into fists. Of course. That was the plan, wasn't it? You were supposed to swoop in and make sure I complied, keep me from embarrassing them any further. Jenna! I laughed bitterly. You know what the worst part is? I actually thought you were different. I thought maybe you gave a damn about me. Vanessa's grip tightened on the steering wheel. You don't understand how things work in this family. I understand perfectly, I snapped, and I'm done. The car fell into silence, the city lights blurring past us. Finally, Vanessa spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Are you going to leave? I turned to her, my resolve hardening. Yes. She exhaled, something between relief and regret flickering in her eyes. Then let me help you. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to tell her to go to hell and leave me alone. But deep down, I knew I couldn't do this alone. Not yet. So I nodded. And just like that, the game changed. I wasn't running anymore. I was planning my return. The morning after the disastrous engagement party, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. Messages from friends, relatives, business partners. Everyone had something to say about what had happened. But the one message that made my blood run cold was from my father. Come to the office. We need to talk. I knew what that meant. My family never spoke in anger where others could hear. We saved our real fights for conference rooms and board meetings where betrayal was delivered with the precision of a well-executed contract termination. By the time I arrived at Whitmore Enterprises, the tension in the air was suffocating. Employees averted their gazes as I stepped off the elevator, the entire office already buzzing with whispers about the scandal of last night. My father's assistant barely looked at me before motioning towards the double doors of his office. I didn't knock. I had no reason to be polite anymore. Inside, my father sat behind his mahogany desk, his hands folded as he studied me with an expression that was unreadable. My mother stood near the window, her arms crossed, while Vanessa perched on the couch, her face a picture of forced neutrality. Sit, my father commanded. His voice was calm, too calm. I didn't. Whatever you have to say it. He exhaled sharply, his fingers tightening against the desk. You've embarrassed this family. You humiliated us in front of our investors, our partners. Do you even understand the damage you've done? I let out a bitter laugh. I embarrassed you? You canceled my engagement party to manipulate Vanessa back into a relationship that benefits you, and I'm the one who embarrassed you? My mother sighed dramatically. Jenna, don't be naive. Business is built on alliances, on trust. You and David, she practically spat his name, are a mismatch. He brings nothing to the table. He built a company worth millions from nothing. He's about to close one of the biggest tech deals of the decade. But you couldn't see past his old car and the fact that he didn't grow up eating at private clubs, could you? My father's jaw clenched. Maxwell was supposed to be our partner. Do you realize what you've cost us by bringing David into that conversation? Cost you? I shook my head, stepping closer to the desk. No, I exposed you. You assumed David was beneath you, and now that you know the truth, you're scrambling to salvage your reputation. You want his success now, don't you? Now that you know he's worth something. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice hesitant. Jenna, Dad just wants what's best for you. No, Vanessa, he wants what's best for himself, just like he always has. My father stood then, his presence towering over me. Listen carefully, Jenna. If you continue down this path, you will no longer be a Whitmore. You will not have a place in this family, in this company, in our world. You will lose everything. I stared at him, unflinching. I already lost everything the moment I realized my family doesn't care about me, only what I can bring to the table. So, congratulations, Dad. You don't have to cut me off. I'm walking away. The silence in the room was deafening. My mother's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to actually say it. Vanessa looked down at her hands, unable to meet my gaze. My father's expression remained cold, but I could see it. The flicker of something almost human in his eyes. Regret? Doubt? It didn't matter. I turned on my heel and walked out of the office, my head high. As I stepped into the hallway, my phone buzzed again. This time it was David. Meet me at the pavilion. We need to talk. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to push down the emotions that threatened to consume me. Because if there was one thing I had learned from my family, it was that war was never fought with swords. It was fought with strategy, and I was done playing by their rules. It was time to make my own. I sat in my car outside the Whitmore estate, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The glow from the grand chandeliers spilled through the mansion windows, illuminating the figures inside, all elegantly dressed, drinking champagne, and laughing as if nothing had happened. As if my engagement hadn't just been shattered. As if my family hadn't betrayed me. I had come here not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see it for myself. The party was still happening, only now, it wasn't my engagement celebration. It was something else entirely. A business event. A merger announcement. A showcase of power orchestrated by my parents. And at the center of it all stood James Whitmore, the man I had given my heart to, the man who had promised me forever, standing beside my father with a champagne flute in hand, toasting to a deal that had erased me from their lives. I exhaled, feeling the raw burn of betrayal deep in my chest. My mother had made it clear on the phone. Business comes first, darling. You were always so sentimental, but James understands. He knows what it takes to build something lasting. Lasting, like the empire they were so obsessed with maintaining, like the legacy they believed my relationship had threatened. The same legacy they were now cementing by aligning themselves with the Whitmores through business, not love. I had been a pawn, nothing more. My relationship with James had never been about me. It had been about leverage, about influence, about ensuring that our family's fortunes remained intertwined. But when it became clear that James had chosen his loyalty to power over his love for me, my parents had wasted no time cutting me out of the picture. I had loved James. I had fought for him, and he had let me go without so much as a fight. I clenched my jaw, my breath coming out in sharp bursts. No, I wouldn't sit here and drown in their betrayal. I wouldn't let them reduce me to nothing. I had lost the battle, but the war had just begun. As I stepped out of the car, my heels clicked sharply against the driveway, echoing in the night. The security at the entrance hesitated when they saw me, but they wouldn't dare stop me. I was still a Whitmore, whether they liked it or not. The moment I walked through the grand double doors, a hush fell over the crowd. Eyes turned, whispers spread. My mother was the first to react. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, stepping toward me with a forced smile, her fingers clutching my wrist as if she could physically drag me out of the room. I pulled my arm away. "Enjoying the party. You did say it was a family event, didn't you?" My voice was ice, my expression unreadable. Her lips thinned. "Don't make a scene, Evelyn." "Oh, wouldn't dream of it," I said smoothly, grabbing a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "I'm just here to celebrate with my family." James approached then, stiff, his blue eyes cautious. "Eve, I didn't expect you to come." I took a sip of my drink, letting the bubbles fizzle on my tongue before responding. Clearly, I let my gaze flick toward my father, who was watching with veiled irritation, and then back to James. "But why wouldn't I? After all, my family went through so much trouble to arrange this business engagement with you." He flinched. "You don't understand." "Oh, I do." I cut him off, my voice calm but sharp. "I understand perfectly. You made your choice, James, and so did they." He reached for me then, perhaps in some weak attempt at an apology, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said quietly. "You don't get to play the victim in a betrayal of your own making." A murmur rippled through the crowd. My father stepped forward, placing a firm hand on James's shoulder, as if to remind him where he stood. "Evelyn, this is neither the time nor place for—" I turned to him, tilting my head. "You always told me that family was the most important thing, Father." My voice was smooth, unwavering. "But I see now you only meant when it benefited you." His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He knew I was right. I placed my empty glass on a nearby tray, smoothing the fabric of my dress. "Enjoy your party, enjoy your business empire, but don't forget—" I leaned in slightly, my voice dropping to a whisper. "The things you discard have a way of coming back." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving them standing in the wake of my words. The night air was cold against my skin as I stepped outside, but inside I was burning. They thought they had won. They thought they had erased me. But they had just made their gravest mistake, and I was going to make sure they paid for it. The city skyline glittered beyond the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my apartment, but the beauty of it was lost on me. My hands trembled as I clutched a glass of wine, barely touching the surface of my lips. The past 24 hours had been a whirlwind of emotions, a storm brewing in the heart of two families who had spent years clawing at each other's throats. And now, I was caught in the crossfire, After the disastrous encounter at the Fontaine estate, I spent the night drowning in endless phone calls, my mother furious, my father cold and calculating, my brother warning me to step in line before things got worse, and Leo's voice was the only one I wanted to hear, but it was the one I feared most, because his words were not laced with rage or warnings. No, his words were quiet, urgent, desperate. "Meet me," he had said, "please." So here I was, sitting in my apartment, waiting for the moment my life would unravel further. A knock at the door sent my heart racing. I set the glass down with shaking fingers and made my way to the entrance. When I opened it, Leo stood there, his hair a mess from the wind, his suit slightly undone, as if he had been running through the city just to get here. The moment I saw him, my resolve cracked. He stepped in before I could say anything, closing the door behind him. "I thought they would hurt you," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I thought I was going to lose you." "You might still," I whispered, my throat tight. Leo grabbed my hands, his grip strong but shaking. "No, we don't let them win. We don't let them decide who we can love." I shook my head. "Leo, this isn't just about us. This is about everything, our families, our futures. Everything they built is hanging in the balance." "Then let it fall," he said fiercely. "Let it all burn. I would rather have nothing than live in a world where I don't have you." His words undid me. A sob broke from my lips, and before I could stop myself, I threw my arms around him. He held me tightly, like he was afraid I would disappear. For a moment, there was only silence, only the feeling of his body against mine, the warmth of his skin grounding me in the chaos. But the moment shattered when my phone buzzed on the counter. I pulled away, hesitant, and picked it up. "Father, you have 1 hour to make a decision." I swallowed hard, my hands trembling. Leo peered over my shoulder, reading the message, his jaw clenched. "What do they want?" I exhaled sharply, the weight of my family's ultimatum crashing over me. "They want me to choose, Leo, between them and you." The words felt final, like the last grain of sand slipping through an hourglass, and deep down I knew this was the moment everything changed. The tension in the air had turned suffocating. Each encounter with my family became a carefully orchestrated battle, one where every word, every glance carried the weight of generations of rivalry. But I wasn't fighting for business dominance or corporate prestige. I was fighting for the right to love the man I chose, and yet, as days turned into weeks, I could feel the walls closing in. The first real crack appeared during an impromptu dinner with my parents. My father, always the embodiment of control, swirled his glass of wine before speaking in his low, measured tone. "Isabella, do you know what love is?" I bristled at the question. "Of course I do." He let out a hollow chuckle. "Love is about legacy. It's about ensuring the survival of what we've built. You think this is just about you and Adrian? It's bigger than that. It's about power, about alliances." "You mean it's about control?" I shot back, my voice steady despite the fury bubbling beneath my skin. My mother sighed, her hands tightening around the silverware. "You're being reckless. This isn't just some rebellious phase, Isabella. You're playing with fire." I forced myself to keep my expression neutral, even as I felt the sting of betrayal. "You keep saying that like I don't already know, like I haven't spent my entire life following the rules, making you proud. But this isn't about business. This is about me." My father set his glass down with a sharp clink, his eyes locking onto mine. "Then you're making a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life." I didn't flinch. "If I let you dictate my life, I'll regret that even more." The next evening, Adrian and I met in the one place where the world couldn't reach us, the rooftop of his family's old warehouse. The city stretched below us, lights twinkling like distant stars. He leaned against the railing, looking at me like I was the only thing that mattered. "They're pushing you harder, aren't they?" he asked, his voice laced with frustration. I nodded. "They think love is just another business transaction, that we can be bought, traded, leveraged." Adrian exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his dark hair. "We can't keep doing this, Isabella. Hiding. Living in the shadows." I reached for his hand, intertwining our fingers. "Then let's stop hiding. Let's make them see that nothing they do will change how we feel." His gaze darkened, but not with fear, with determination. "Are you ready for that fight? Because they won't just let us walk away." I lifted my chin. "I was born into this war, Adrian, but for once, I'm fighting for something that truly matters." He pulled me closer, his lips brushing against my forehead. "Then we do this together. No more secrets, no more running." As I looked into his eyes, I knew there was no turning back. By morning, the battle lines would be drawn. The days following the disastrous gala were a blur of tension, whispered conversations, and strategic maneuvering. My father was furious, not just because I had publicly humiliated him, but because I had done it on my own terms. His business rivals had witnessed his daughter defying him, choosing love over legacy, and that was something he couldn't tolerate. I spent most of my time with Adrian, away from the suffocating grasp of my family's expectations. We stayed in a quiet loft in the city, a place that felt more like home than my childhood mansion ever had. Adrian's presence was a steady anchor, but even he couldn't shield me from the inevitable storm that was brewing. One evening, Vanessa, my cousin and one of the few people in my family who actually cared about me, showed up at our door. She looked nervous, constantly glancing over her shoulder as if she had been followed. "You need to be careful, Jenna," she warned, stepping inside. "Your father isn't going to let this go. He sees you as a liability now." I folded my arms, my stomach nodding at her words. "I was never an asset to begin with," I muttered, "only a tool for him to use when it suited his business plans." Vanessa sighed. "I know, but this is different. He's meeting with Adrian's father tomorrow." Adrian stiffened beside me. "My father?" he echoed, his voice sharp. She nodded. "Your family is just as invested in this war as mine, and now that you and Jenna have disrupted their carefully laid plans, they're looking for ways to fix it. They're talking about dissolving business partnerships, pulling funding from projects, anything to force you two apart." I clenched my fists. "Let them try," I said, but my voice wavered slightly. Adrian reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "We knew this would be a fight," he said. "We just have to be ready." Vanessa hesitated, then pulled out an envelope from her purse. "There's something else," she said, handing it to me. "I don't know all the details, but I overheard your father talking to his lawyers. He's preparing documents, something about cutting you off completely." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers, scanning the contents. My name was on every page, followed by legal jargon that boiled down to one thing: my inheritance, my stake in the family business, even my trust fund. Everything was being revoked. "They're trying to leave me with nothing," I murmured. Vanessa placed a hand on my shoulder. "They want you to crawl back, Jenna, to beg for their approval." I met Adrian's gaze, seeing the anger burning behind his normally calm expression. "They think money is the only thing that gives me value," I said quietly. "But I've built something of my own. I don't need them." Vanessa gave me a sad smile. "I know, but they don't. And they won't stop until they make you believe otherwise." I straightened my shoulders. "Then we hit them where it hurts." Adrian nodded, determination hardening his features. "We fight them on their own battlefield, not with threats or manipulation, but with success. We don't let them win." Vanessa exhaled. "I hope you're right." As she left, I felt the weight of what was coming pressing down on me. My father was declaring war in the only way he knew how, by trying to strip me of everything he thought mattered. But he underestimated me, because what he never realized was that the most valuable thing I had was something he could never take away: my freedom to choose my own future, and I was ready to show him just how powerful that choice could be. The ballroom was alive with murmurs as my father and Victor's father stood on opposite sides of the room, each surrounded by their loyal supporters. This was no longer just a family dispute, it was a public battleground, and I was caught in the middle. Victor's grip on my hand tightened. "Are you ready for this?" he whispered. His voice was steady, but I could feel the tension in his fingers. I nodded. "We have no choice." My father stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Juliana, it's time to come home. Enough of this nonsense." "This isn't nonsense," I said, my voice firm. "This is my life, my choice." Victor's father scoffed. "You think love is enough to defy your legacy? The world doesn't work like that." "Maybe it should," Victor shot back. "Maybe it's time for a change." The murmurs grew louder, tension crackling in the air. My father hesitated, glancing at the crowd, calculating. He had spent years molding me into the perfect heiress, obedient, controlled, but I wasn't that girl anymore. "Juliana, you don't understand." "No," I interrupted. "You don't understand. I love Victor, and I won't let your feud dictate my happiness." Silence. Then my mother, who had been quiet all night, stepped forward. "Let her go," she said softly. "If we force her to stay, we lose her forever." My father's jaw tightened, his pride warring with reason. Then, with a slow, reluctant nod, he turned away. Victor exhaled, his forehead resting against mine. "We did it." I let out a shaky laugh. "We did." As we walked out of the ballroom together, hand in hand, I knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The morning after the storm, I woke up to a strange stillness. My phone buzzed with missed calls from my father, my mother, even my brother. A part of me hesitated before answering, but I knew I had to face whatever they had planned next. I met my father at his office, the same imposing space where he had once dictated my future. He gestured for me to sit, his face unreadable. The board is in chaos, he admitted. Investors are nervous. The merger is at risk. And what does that have to do with me? I asked, feigning indifference. He sighed. We need a united front, Isabella. We need you to come back, publicly, as my daughter. A bitter laugh escaped me. You mean as your pawn, after everything? His silence was answer enough. I stood, meeting his gaze. You wanted me gone, and I built something without you. I'm not coming back, not on your terms. As I walked out, a weight lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't running anymore. I was choosing my own future. The air was thick with anticipation as I stepped into the grand hall, the echoes of past conflicts lingering like a shadow. My family was already seated, their expressions unreadable, a mask of propriety disguising the years of animosity and betrayal. Across the room, Daniel stood beside his father, his posture tense, yet his eyes held the same fire that had kept us both going through this war of legacies and pride. I took a deep breath and walked forward, meeting my father's calculating gaze. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled as he surveyed me like a chess piece. So, he said, his voice laced with forced civility. You've decided to finally listen to reason? I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I've decided to end this game. A murmur rippled through the gathered family members, both sides watching like spectators at an arena. I turned to Daniel and took his hand, the simple act causing a visible stir. We're not here to beg for approval. We're not here to bargain. We're here to say that we choose each other, whether or not our families approve. Daniel's father scoffed, shaking his head. You think love is enough to erase decades of rivalry, of competition, of bad blood? No, I admitted, my voice steady. But love is enough to make sure the next generation doesn't inherit this pointless feud. My father exhaled sharply, his fingers tightening against the armrest. And what do you expect us to do? Accept this and act like nothing has happened? Daniel stepped in then, his voice unwavering. We expect you to let go of a battle that neither of you even remembers how it started. We expect you to think beyond your own pride and consider what this war has cost everyone around you. The silence stretched, tense and fragile. Then, to my surprise, my mother, who had been silent all this time, spoke. Enough, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I won't lose another child to this madness. She looked at my father then, something unspoken passing between them. A memory of what they once were before the weight of their names had consumed them. Daniel's father hesitated, his face hardening before he let out a long sigh. You two are as stubborn as your parents. I lifted my chin. Then you know we won't back down. A beat of silence. And then, my father stood up, straightened his tie, and said the last thing I expected. If you're going to do this, do it right. Daniel and I exchanged glances, barely daring to believe it. There was no grand declaration of support, no instant reconciliation, but it was enough. A beginning, not an end, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight on my shoulders begin to lift, because we had won, not in battle, not in business, but in something far more important, in love, in choice, in freedom.